Meet Reed Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reed is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reed.
Howdy, listeners and viewers, coast to coast, the Gulf to the 51st state, well, Canada anyway, and around the globe. Reed Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and the Cowboys Take on all those video platforms everywhere. Remember, please subscribe, hit the like button, hit the little ring-a-ding bell deal so that you know when these videos are coming out and you don't have to search or wonder. So today, #1, I apologize. I wanted to get this out 3 days ago. I seem to say that all the time, but it is the way it is. This is springtime in the Rockies and springtime on the ranch, and it's been busy. I've heard from a whole bunch of listeners and viewers, and the comments I get the most are, #1, they love the shows. Great. And I'm bringing them information that they have not heard, don't get, etc., haven't thought about anywhere else. That's kind of the purpose of this show. #2, they're not real happy about the fact I don't get these shows out on kind of a more set schedule. I mean, I'll be the first to admit they've been a little helter-skelter, sometimes 2, I think once 3 in a week, and then a long week passes and nothing. So, and the third comment I've been receiving is that they think the shows are a tad bit too long. You know, people's attention spans aren't what they used to be. So I'm going to try and address all those. #1, here's my best plan, the best laid plans of mice and men. I mean, I have lots of stuff going, folks. And I do this for love of country. I don't do it for any other reason. And because I love you folks, and you need to have information so you can make proper decisions to protect yourself, your freedoms, your family, and your property. And if you don't have knowledge, which the mainstream media works very hard, and the government works very hard to make sure you do not possess, then it's kind of tough to make the right decisions. And they love it when you make the wrong decisions. Here's what I'm going to try and do. I'm going to try and get 2 shows out every week. I'm going to try and limit them to a half an hour. These are not promises. These are a promise to make best efforts. I'm going to get 1 show out on Thursday night or Friday each week. In fact, this show will be posting Thursday, April 30th. Thursday, April 30th. And the next show I'm going to get out either Sunday night or Monday. I'm sorry, my schedule does not allow me to give you a specific day, but those will be the time frames: Thursday, Friday, Sunday, Monday. And I think I can cover new news and stuff that's happened over the weekends that perhaps you're not acquainted with, and I'm going to do my best. My second promise to try to achieve is to keep the shows give or take 30 minutes or less. And let's see how this goes. And keep those comments coming. Now, all of you, I'm not going to give you a rant story because I have a really cool show for you. You know, everybody's talking about trade wars, the trade wars, and the end of the earth and the end of economies as we know it, and nobody's going to sell us anything, and everybody hates us, and yada, yada. You've heard all the crap. Maybe we ought to know what a trade war is, and maybe we ought to investigate some examples, like from history. You know, I'm a kind of big history buff here. It kind of paves the way for you. The touchstone of the past is the guidepost to the future. You can rely on that. So today we're going to go over what is a trade war, and I'm going to give you 5 examples, and I could have picked 20, of trade wars in which various countries have been involved in, enmeshed in, over the last 200 years, and what their outcomes were. And you're going to be struck by the historical similarities from the actual tales, the history I'm bringing you, and today. And perhaps it will make you or help you make a decision as to how you feel about the current trade war that the mainstream media likes to tell you that Trump has precipitated all by his lonesome. A lot of you wanted to know how our ranch lieutenant was doing after his heart problem during the middle of a blizzard. I brought you that story in the last video. So if you haven't seen it, it's toward the end, and I don't want to call it humorous, but it's certainly intriguing. And I'll be happy to tell you that he got his pacemaker in. He's doing great. They have him on like 12 drugs. You know, China must be really happy until they cut off the drugs, I guess, because of the trade war. And he's doing terrific. So thank you for inquiring. I'm not going to have a quote from the founders on this show either. We'll make up for that in the next show, which will be Sunday, Monday night. So let's get right into this, shall we? First of all, let me give you a little rat-a-tat-tat of various little, I don't want to call it tidbits, some of them are pretty big morsels, huge nuggets of news that you need to be aware of. And then we're going to go into this, the history of trade wars and 5 examples of trade wars between different countries over the last 2 centuries. By the way, including the United States. I think you'll find it fascinating. All right, so the Canadian elections. I mean, how the Canadian Conservatives lost this election is beyond me. It really is. And Mark Carney is a beast from the City of London, the Bank of England, and the Bank of Canada. He's a globalist. I mean, yes, he's better than Trudeau, but that's like saying a filthy mop is better than a dirty mop. How's that? And unfortunately, I think that part of what happened up there is Trump, in his Trump way, got a lot of Canadians pissed off at the United States and Trump for talking about them being another state, and, you know, kind of made them feel like he was looking down and the United States was looking down on them. And then the trade war, the tariff deal, kind of, should we say, put the nail in the coffin. This is not the first time, as you will learn, that Canada and the United States have been at odds over trade. You'll find it fascinating. But I think that contributed to either conservatives not showing up or liberals showing up in droves, or some conservative Canadians actually voting kind of against Trump and against the United States by voting for Carney. Anyway, very disappointing and a definite setback for what I believe, and I brought you this show, is Trump's plan to, should we say, re-emerge the old Monroe Doctrine, but expand it to the entire Western Hemisphere, from the Arctic to the tip of South America, Cape Horn. And we'll have to see how it plays out. But unfortunately, we don't have an ally in Canada right now, at the helm of Canada right now, even though he plays nicey nice, okay? He's a globalist through and through. He is not far removed from Trudeau in his exercise of power and control and his lust for more. And he's tied into the, you know, you will be happy and you will nothing group. So not good. And that election, by the way, was just 48 hours ago. We have, you'll love this, Maryland. Let me just take one state in the United States. This goes right into our trade thought. Maryland, which is a blue state, run like a blue state, and therefore run rather poorly. When the current governor took over Maryland from a Republican governor, the state had a $3.7 billion surplus. And it now, 3 years later, has a $2.3 billion deficit. That's a rather remarkable turnaround for a single state, don't you think? I mean, it's a turnaround of more than 200 and some odd percent from positive to negative. And to kind of cap matters off in the typical blue Democratic progressive tradition, on top of this insult, he has added the injury just over the last 2 months of $1.6 billion in new taxes and fees that are going to be levied on the poor citizens of Maryland. Does that kind of give you an idea of why all these blue states are in trouble? California has $87 billion deficit, okay? $87 billion. But they're going to pay out $800 billion in reparations, folks. Not a problem. You know, somebody will come help them. All right. So there's been a bunch of court cases. There's been a couple rulings by the Supreme Court which are not great. One of their rulings recently was that Trump has to kind of cease and desist from using the Illegal Aliens and Enemies of the State Act. I'm bringing it back to mind for you, of 1798, in using it to deport certain criminal elements and designated terrorist elements of illegal aliens. Not good. There's been a whole bunch of other court cases too. I'm assembling those right now, and I'm going to bring them to you. But some of them you will just like shake your head and go, really? Like, what country do we live in? Have these people, have these judges, almost all of them appointed by Obama, gee, big surprise, have these judges ever read, heard of, know anything of or about the Constitution? I mean, they're really that crazy. Elon Musk is not going to be, he's going to be heading Doge, but in his own words, his time is going to be much more limited relative to Doge. And he's going to redirect his time to his companies, particularly Tesla, which the left, of course, has torched, literally and figuratively. And I completely understand it. I think it's very disappointing. Hopefully, part of this is kind of a psyops deal, and he's going to remain more involved behind the scenes than everybody's letting you on, but trying to take the heat off his companies and himself. We'll see. But he's brilliant. He's an American. He is pro everything that you and I are pro for. And although he thinks a little bit differently, I think, than most of us, and we'll just have to sit back and see. And we'll have to see if this slows the Doge effort to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, and boy, is there a lot of fraud, to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, or whether it doesn't, whether it's more lip service than actuality. A Milwaukee judge, you probably heard about this, while ICE is waiting in the hallway outside her courtroom, and she's conducting a case over domestic violence, witnesses there, the victims there, cops there, the whole 9 yards, on an illegal alien who had been deported and came back into the United States years ago after being deported. And I never did find out what happened with the case, but it seems that she went out, she took the defense attorney and the alien, the illegal alien, into her office, showed him a back door out to bypass the ICE agents waiting to arrest him in the hallway of the courthouse, and then went out and distracted them by screaming and yelling at them. She got arrested by the Department of Justice. Good. More judges ought to be arrested by the Department of Justice when they break the law. I mean, if a judge committed murder, does the judge think that he's above the law, or she? If they commit fraud, if they steal money from somebody, I mean, where do you draw the line? You don't. The law is the law, and of all the people, of all the positions in the United States or on the planet Earth that ought to uphold the law, it's a judge. Wow. Okay. Missouri is about to pass legislation, first in the United States, to seize, I kind of love this, to seize Red Chinese land purchases. The Red Chinese have bought a bunch of land around the United States, some in very sensitive areas, as you know. Missouri's had enough. Other states are looking at this. They're kind of watching what Missouri's going to get done. And if you remember, Biden poo-pooed this idea and actually expanded the Chinese Communist Party's ability to buy land in the United States. Of course, he was getting $1 million a month, he and Hunter, so I guess you understand why. But Missouri is going to seize all Red Chinese land. That's right. I don't know what they're planning to do with it, give it to the public, sell it. I have no idea, but I kind of like the idea, actually. You know, Americans can't buy land in China. Did you know that? So it's kind of a reciprocal seizure tariff, you could say. You know, it's part of the trade war. All right. The ACLU, communist outfit that it is, anti-American, anti-constitutional, anti-you and me outfit that it is, and anti-law and order outfit that it is, they are boasting, and I have the articles on the website, on therightsideradio.com, as with all the stuff I'm bringing you always. You can find those articles, you can see those videos, you can see all the backups, since I'm trying to limit this to half an hour, and see all the details, because some of these stories are fascinating. They had just sent out an email, and it's posted on the site under Trump Resistance. That's the section. And they're boasting about the fact that they have sued Trump 104 times in the first 100 days of his presidency. Great. I mean, really? Can't win at the ballot box, so you think you may win in court, huh? That's kind of the program. And slowing Trump down, of course, cripples what he's trying to get done economically, which of course hurts him for the midterms. I mean, you know, Americans, the American economy, the American dollar, whatever, be damned. Who cares? As long as we maintain our power and control, or recaptured, I should say, in the case of the ACLU. Very important story, and I'm going to track this for you. The Federal Reserve is in the process of easing the requirements for passing a stress test for the banks, particularly the big CFI banks, which I have warned about. I've warned you about those banks for years, the big ones, Bank of America, JP Morgan Trust, et cetera, et cetera. The stress test is a test that's applied to banks to see how they would withstand, and their capital and their balance sheets would withstand certain types of bad stuff. And if they don't pass a stress test, they have to increase their reserves and their capital so that there's not a bank failure, so that depositors don't lose their money, and so that the FDIC, i.e. you and me, the taxpayer, doesn't have to bail out the beast. I find this really concerning, and it's kind of under the radar, as you would expect, but I'm going to be tracking it, and we'll keep you told, keep you up to speed. All right, how about our trade part of the show, shall we? If you've never heard of Trippen's dilemma, you should look it up. Trippen's dilemma is that when you are the reserve currency of the world, and you are the bank of the world, which is what the United States has been and still is, then you are doomed to always run trade deficits. And other countries will enjoy advantages by always running with you trade surpluses, which in effect devalues your currency, in effect strips wealth from your country, and in effect transfers that wealth to all the countries with surpluses. Now, this is just one facet of the dilemma, not the Trippen's dilemma and the other dilemmas that we face. And it's what Trump is trying to fix. I mean, he is trying to, believe it or not, get America to the point where America focuses on the Western Hemisphere and not so much the world, where the reserve currency is not really the reserve currency of yesteryear, but it's a principal trading currency mechanism that the world still uses. And where the United States is not always looking at deficits with its trading partners, not to mention unfair trade practices, where they charge tariffs and the United States charges nothing. I've told you about that in the last several shows. So what's really interesting here is that none of this is new stuff, you know? History has this way of repeating. Let me give you 5 examples of trade wars and their outcomes over the last 200 years. Number 1, believe it or not, the Boston Tea Party, 1773, the American colonies versus Britain. December 16, 1773, 60 Americans dressed as Mohawk Indians, poorly, boarded ships that belonged to the British East India Company, one of the oligarchs, the most favored companies, and threw 344 chests containing 18,000 pounds, it would be millions upon millions, tens of billions of dollars today, into the waters of Boston Harbor. And it was in response to two laws, trade laws, tariff laws, that Britain had passed in the previous year or two. The 1767 Townshend Acts put duties, tariffs, on products that were imported into the British colonies, and then it was repealed in 1770, except for the tariff, the duty, as they called it back then, on tea. And then the 1773 Tea Act, which was really the catalyst for the Boston Tea Party, gave the East India Company, talk about a little nepotism here and oligarchy and fascism, tax-exempt status, but they still charged the tax to the colonists. It was like a double profit for the East India Company. And I'm sure there were some kickbacks to the crown too, but we won't go there. And it also gave the East India Company a monopoly on all tea exported to the colonies. The British Parliament retaliated against the colonies for the Boston Tea Party by passing what was called the Intolerable Acts. It closed Boston Harbor to sea trade. And in the end, and think about this in the context of today's boiling geopolitical situations around the world, in the end, it was a key factor in uniting the colonies against British oppression and creating the conditions under which the revolution blew up just 2 years later. Huge deal, right? A tariff on tea, and the American empire was born. The Embargo Act, 1807, again, the United States versus Britain. So the British, who have always wanted to continue to control North America, we've talked about this, even up to today, folks. Hello, Mark Carney up there in Canada. During the Napoleonic Wars, the British were desperate to get crews for their warships. Remember, Britain was a naval power, the naval power. And they were basically hijacking U.S. ships in the early 1800s at sea and taking the crewmen off it and impressing them into service in the British Navy. So obviously, the Americans were not happy about this, particularly Thomas Jefferson, who was then president. And he responded by placing an embargo, which is kind of a form of tariff, on all foreign products entering the United States. The outcome was less than desired, shall we say. And a lot of historians view the 1807 embargo, in other words, the American tariffs, as a failure. American trade activity was greatly reduced. In the meantime, the British, who were had their fingers in everything all over the world at that time, kind of the height of their empire, their interest in South America and elsewhere continued to grow. I mean, it was like, the colonies, forget the colonies. And the smuggling industry grew by leaps and bounds, which you see in almost any of these types of tariff and embargo situations anywhere in the world, right? Humans are pretty enterprising creatures. There's always a way around everything. And British smuggling into the Americas undermined U.S. merchants, and it kind of highlighted American naval weakness. I mean, we couldn't even defend our own coasts. And that display of weakness, think about Afghanistan, the withdrawal. Think about Ukraine, Russia kicking NATO's butt, etc. That weakness emboldened the British, along with acrimony between the two countries and the economic, shall we say, contest that was going on, to invade America the second time in the War of 1812. Another interesting result to a quote-unquote trade war. Yes? The first Opium War. This is very interesting. 1839 to 1842. Britain versus China. You know, one of the things you'll notice in these first three examples is that it was the hegemon, Britain at that time, that continued to use force, military force, to try and remain the hegemon and expand their influence and their control and extraction and profit by the resources of other nations. How long ago was that? Oh, that's right. That was 220 years ago. Does that sound familiar? Anyway, there was huge demand for Chinese goods, silk and porcelain and all sorts of stuff. It was way more than the demand by China of British goods. Sound familiar? And the British East India Company, oh, there they are again. Well, it's kind of like BlackRock. The BlackRock of the early 1800s, right? They sought to address this trade deficit. They figured they'd just get the Chinese population fully stoned and undermine their social mores. Does this sound familiar? And they cultivated opium poppies, the British East India Company did, and exported them by the tons and tons and tons to China. By 1820, China was awash with drugs and widespread addiction, major social and economic disruption. And the Qing dynasty at that time, Qing, said, okay, enough of this. And in 1839, they seized and destroyed 1,400 tons of opium in British warehouses, blocked British merchant ships from what's now known as the Pearl River. It's kind of like the Boston Tea Party over there in China. The outcome was that British sent the Royal Navy. Here we go again, right? Little gunboat diplomacy, they called it back then. And it defeated the Qing forces. I mean, it had far superior firepower. And got in return for the defeat, for kicking China's butt, a bunch of really unequal treaties, which included a big indemnity by China that they would protect British interests or repay Britain for any British interests that were damaged, and commercial privileges and territorial concessions in China. By the way, going forward 200 years, President Xi over there still talks about that time period, includes the Americans, because the Americans were over there too. You ever see the movie The Sand Pebbles? Great movie. If you haven't seen it, see it. It's right at this time. It's about the Boxer Rebellion. And this is a long, lingering, festering wound in the pride bubble of China, which is very important in Asian cultures. And it's part of the underlying animosity, acrimony, and competition between the West and China right now. It's pretty amazing how these things bear out over time. Number 4, we'll talk about the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, 1930. You've heard a lot about this. I've brought you the story of this. In fact, when I was talking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, bringing his history, and the history of the 7, in my opinion, greatest presidents in the United States, which was 2 or 3 or 4 months ago. You can find it in the archives on therightsideradio.com. It was named after lawmakers Willis Hawley and Reed Smoot, and it raised U.S. tariffs on 900 imported products through protectionist trade policies. And the act was part of Herbert Hoover's, the president at that time, prior to Roosevelt. It was part of his promise in his 1928 presidential campaign, because he was promising to help struggling farmers in the United States by increasing tariffs on agricultural products and the import of cheap labor, unskilled labor, from foreign countries. Canada, see if this sounds familiar to today, Canada, who had up to that time been the United States' most loyal trading partner, they were pissed. And they imposed retaliatory tariffs on 40% of U.S. exports to Canada. And they forged closer economic links with, the British. The British got their little hooks back into North America where they always want to be. And 23 other U.S. trading partners threatened retaliatory actions. Few of them undertook them. The outcome is in doubt, okay? There are historians who say this precipitated and increased and made more serious the Great Depression. There are others who say that it actually lessened the impact of the Great Depression because it was a festering wound that had to be addressed, that had to get antibiotics at some point in time. You couldn't continue the course of conduct of the United States trade policies. I guess we'll never really know. But what we do know is this: American exports and imports decreased by 67% after the passage of this act. And prices of some things, not everything, of staples like sugar and eggs went up dramatically. That we do know. Number 5, the chicken war. The chicken war. Yeah, I know you're laughing. It's true. 1962, that's not that far away, right? This is during John F. Kennedy's stint as president. And it's the United States versus Europe. Well, gee, that kind of sounds familiar with today's history, isn't it? The chicken war is a great example of how carefully targeted tariffs, not just helter-skelter, huge tariff everything type approaches, can actually be used to great effect and in the end benefit all parties. By the 60s, decades of improvement in U.S. mass production techniques in the poultry industry began to undercut European competition. I mean, the United States was just heads and tails in front of Europe in the poultry industry. And the European Economic Community's common market, which was kind of the precursor to the EU now, the European Union, raised a 13.43 cent tariff on U.S. poultry. Remember, these are back in those days. That would be the same as probably a $1.30 tariff on chicken now, or more. And it was their effort to try and improve the situation of their domestic producers. The tariff had previously been just 4.7 cents. So poultry imports from the United States to Europe fell 64%. And it led to a loss of $46 million by American poultry producers. Remember, folks, this is a long time ago, even though it was 1962. 47 million is probably several hundred million, if not $1 billion in today's dollars. So after all this was done, the U.S. retaliated, right? Here we go in the trade war. And it targeted tariffs on trucks like Volkswagen in Germany and on brandy to impact French brandy producers and potato starch to damage Dutch potato growers. Well, guess what? It worked. It worked rather well, actually. The unintended legacy of the chicken wars was the creation of new assembly methods in the United States that allowed automakers here to avoid automobile import tariffs, and included the new, at that time, practice, which we're now contending with in the current quote-unquote trade war, of outsourcing the manufacture of parts for vehicles overseas, bringing them back and then assembling them in plants in the United States so that you could put the Made in America label on them. It also helped Europe because Europe was able to advance and make more modern a number of its procedures and logistics in many of its industries in response to and to overcome the American targeted tariffs. And listen, folks, there's other great stories on tariffs, all with kind of similar. The 1987, and you can look these up, the 1985 pasta war. Really, I'm not making that up. The 1987 trade war with Japan, which was over electronics. The 1993 banana wars. I'm not making these up. The 2002 steel tariffs, which many of us still remember. Let me tell you that going back to about the time of the American Revolution, there was a book written called The Wealth of Nations. It was written by Adam Smith. He was a free trade fanatic, and he was brilliant. And unfortunately, we don't follow his principles too well today because government is too big and government has its fingers in everything. But he thought that internal free trade and external free trade could best be achieved through the abolition of all local customs, all local taxes, and most important of all, free trade in foreign commerce through the abolition of all duties, all tariffs, all bounties, and all prohibitions between nations. And perhaps that's where we're going, because many of the countries that are now negotiating with Trump are going to zero tariffs. I will tell you this, that the United States could not continue to be the lender of last resort for trade surpluses for all the other countries on the planet. I mean, the bottom line is we're close to broke right now, and that would have finished the job. How we got there, I'll never get that done in a half an hour, and I'm probably over half an hour now, excuse me. But that will be a subject of another. How we got here will be the subject of another show. In the upcoming show here, 4 days from now, I guess, we're going to talk about the real estate market in the United States. I'm going to bring you a whole bunch of statistics and areas, that is locations, and what's happening with real estate. You need to know this because many of you own real estate of some shape, type, or form. Under everything we do lies the land, and even those of you who do not own real estate, rent real estate, and what's going on is going to affect you too. I think you'll find it kind of fascinating. And I'm also going to bring you up to speed on COVID and all the studies that are coming out, which will really kind of, if your faith wasn't shattered already, your faith will be fully shattered when you hear about these studies and what's going on. The good news I'll leave you with is that there have been criminal referrals on Fauci and his whole gang of health thugs and traitors in the last 2 weeks, and we shall see what happens there. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Hopefully you'll hear from me again Sunday night or Monday. And you keep the wind at your back. We will talk to you soon. Read Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and the Cowboys Take. Remember, all the articles, etc., are on the website, on therightsideradio.com. Some great videos also, which go to the subjects I talked about today and in the last show. And visit that website. I mean, it is really one of the best on the web in terms of a compendium of current information. You take her easy.
Please remember, if you've missed any shows, just click on Show Archive and you'll find all of his shows. We look forward to seeing you here again next week for another episode of Read Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side.